rural South Carolina in the early 1970s, there was a spate of unexplained disappearances.
Kim Gilkins was a girl that went missing in Charleston.
Janice Kirby and Patricia Alsbrook, they both went missing.
There are others that went missing. They vanished into thin air.
It took 5 years before police realized that all of the missing people had one acquaintance in common: Donald Pee Wee Gaskins.
He had a propensity to kidnap and kill youth who were like a runaway type of individual who would not have an immediate cry that they were missing.
As investigators traced the thread of his crimes, they struggled to pinpoint a motive.
He was just an evil person. I mean, he killed people for really no significant reason. It didn't bother him. He had no remorse from it.
It was an urge that had started in Gaskins when he was still just a boy.
If he could make a weapon out of anything, he would figure out how to do it.
From the moment he could walk until the day he walked into the execution chamber, Donald Pee Wee Gaskins was drawn to violence, making it inevitable that he's now recognized as one of the world's most evil killers. Despite his reputation for violence, in the quiet farming community that was his stomping ground, Donald Pee Wee Gaskins also had the power to charm and deceive the people he crossed paths with.
He was pleasant to talk to. You could talk about digging a well or putting on a roof or time of day, the weather, whatever was going on, he would just carry on the conversation. But you always had to remember that in the back of his mind, all he was looking for was a small opening to cut your throat or kill you or choke you or whatever.
He wasn't smart, he wasn't educated, but he was sly like a fox.
Brought up hearing stories of his sinister activities, bringing Gaskins to justice became a family affair for Sheriff Billy Barnes.
I've heard his name ever since I was growing up in Florence County because he had a reputation. My daddy was in law enforcement. In fact, my daddy was involved in putting him in jail the first time he went to jail, and I was involved in putting him there the last time he went.
In a reign of terror 4 decades long, Donald Gaskins left untold destruction in his wake. This killer's story begins on the 13th of March 1933 in Florence County, South Carolina.
Donald Henry Gaskins, always known to the family as Pee Wee, was one of 5 children. He lived with his mother and his grandmother in Prospect in South Carolina.
He was called Pee Wee all the time, I guess because of his stature.
He was born at just over 4 pounds. He was a very, very tiny baby, and he was barely over 5 foot and 130 pounds the rest of his life.
His entire childhood is contested. There are all sorts of versions.
He used to tell people that he was beaten and abused by his family, but that's not true. Other people who grew up knowing his family knew that they were a very loving and doting family.
He loved his grandmother more than anybody that I know of. He stayed with his grandmother most of his life.
The family were regulars at church in the tiny hamlet of Prospect Crossroads.
Prospect is a small town in Johnsonville, South Carolina. There is no stoplight. If you drive too fast and you blink one time, you're going to miss the sign. You're not even going to know you went through a town. All the little towns that surround it are farm towns. They were known for tobacco farms.
From as soon as he could walk, Pee Wee Gaskins looked set to disturb the tranquility of the rural community.
He was troublesome even as a small child.
From an early age, he was pulling legs off of frogs and harming animals.
But the boy's violence was not just reserved for animals.
He stabbed a teacher with a pencil. He had a temper on him. I believe the day that he stabbed the teacher, he ended up jumping out of the window of the schoolhouse and running off.
By the age of 11, Gaskins had fallen in with a couple of boys who were up to no good.
He turned to sexual crimes where he was raping other young children.
By the very start of his teens, Gaskins was well known to the local police.
He was on their radar from a young life on and was known to be a burglar and running afoul of the law.
By the time he's 13 years old, he's a career criminal. And that is highly unusual, especially when you overlay it with the reports of his cruelty to animals. This is telling us, really, there may be personality disorder here, and it's something that's probably going to be very problematic in the future.
Podcaster Nicole Simmons grew up hearing stories about Gaskins, who was a neighbor of her great-aunt, Mary Alice.
Mary Alice was born in 1930 in Effingham, South Carolina. When she was being raised, her home sat right next to where Pee Wee was being raised. Their houses were so close together. I remember my uncle saying one time that you could almost pass a cup of sugar from one window to the next.
In 1946, 16-year-old Mary Alice caught her young neighbor, Pee Wee Gaskins, breaking into her family home.
And she grabbed a hatchet, and when he came in, he took the hatchet from her. Pee Wee raped her and hit her in the head with the hatchet and left her in the ditch of a cornfield. I am pretty positive that he thought that she was dead. There were some men coming along the side of the road that found her and took her to get her help, and she was very blessed and fortunate to not have severe wounds. She healed just fine, and she lived to tell her story. And because of that, at the age of 13, that ended Pee Wee into reform school.
Perhaps unsurprisingly, Gaskins rebelled against the harsh conditions of the reform school, escaping a number of times. On one occasion, he was reportedly brought back having married a girl he'd got pregnant.
While Gaskins was at reform school, he stabbed a fellow pupil who supposedly attacked him sexually.
I think most of the things that Gaskins did were pretty impulsive. This is instant gratification or total recklessness and just dealing with things as they come along.
In 1951, Donald Pee Wee Gaskins was released from juvenile detention. Years of reform school had done nothing to curb Gaskins' malevolent urges. In South Carolina's Tobacco Belt, he soon found new criminal opportunities.
In 1952, Gaskins was involved in insurance fraud. He was burning down barns so that the owner could claim money. But he was discovered by one of the owner's daughters, and he lost his temper, and he hit her over the head with a hammer, which saw him eventually sentenced to 5 years in adult prison.
Gaskins ends up in prison then for attempted murder. He's got no fear of violence. He's got no fear of people or the system. So it's unsurprising that when he goes into prison, he starts to assert himself in there as well and gets involved in the murder of another inmate.
Gaskins pleaded guilty in 1954 to being an accessory to the murder of a fellow inmate. Another 3 years were tacked on to his sentence.
The other prisoners then became scared of him. If he can take this guy down, we need to watch our backs.
Paroled in 1961, 28-year-old Gaskins fell off the radar of law enforcement for a little while. But in June 1964, he made the papers once again.
He escaped out of the old Florence County courthouse.
Gaskins was caught molesting a teenage girl and was charged with statutory rape.
He jumped out of the second-story window, and that's how he hurt his leg, and he would walk with a very distinct limp as long as you were looking at him. But he did that, I think, just so if you turned your head, he could run from you.
After 2 months on the run, Gaskins was caught and sent back to jail. By the age of 35, Donald Pee Wee Gaskins had spent more than half his life incarcerated. Released in 1968, he was free once again, but far from turning over a new leaf, he was ready to escalate. Only this time, he did not plan on getting caught. In September 1975, 13-year-old South Carolina schoolgirl Kim Gelkins went on a trip with Donald Pee Wee Gaskins.
Kim Gelkins was a young lady from Charleston.
Kim's mother had died and her father had spent time in prison. 42-year-old Gaskins was by this time living with his new 19-year-old wife, and Kim Gelkins had become friendly with her.
Pee Wee met her in Charleston, where he was working, and brought her back to Florence County with him. She was staying with him and his family, and one night he just told his family he was taking her to the bus station and sending her back to Charleston to her family.
Kim Gelkins never arrived home to Charleston.
And it was her sister. She went to school and said, "My sister Kim has gone." And it was the teacher who reported Kim's disappearance.
The two detectives from Charleston that traced her to the Prospect community, and the last person she was seen with was Pee Wee.
When the police searched a property he owned in Lake City, some of Kim's clothes were discovered.
And so that's what put the spotlight on Pee Wee.
On the 14th of November 1975, a warrant was issued to arrest Gaskins on suspicion of contributing to the delinquency of a minor. But when Charleston police contacted colleagues in Florence County to locate him, they began to suspect that if Kim had not simply run away, and that if she had come to harm, she was not the only one. On his release from jail in 1968, Donald Pee Wee Gaskins had returned to the Midlands of South Carolina.
And he was just a itinerant type of worker, sort of handyman, carpenter, roofer, well driller. Sometimes he was living in Charleston area. Sometimes he was living in Sumter area. And then I guess sometimes he stayed around Prospect in Florence County where he was born and raised.
He was a hard-working fella. He worked all the time. He just had bad habits when he wasn't working. Petty crimes, breaking in, stealing.
In the early 1970s, however, Gaskins' criminal enterprises went largely unnoticed by the authorities.
He was not on the radar of law enforcement.
That was a rural county and limited resources to the sheriff's department.
On the 10th of November 1970, 2 teenage girls failed to return to their homes in Sumter, South Carolina.
Janice Kirby and Patricia Alsbrook were really close friends.
Janice Faye Kirby was Pee Wee's niece. And apparently Pee Wee was in the neighborhood working as a roofer on a project a mile from where she was taken or disappeared.
When contacted by family members looking for 15-year-old Janice, Gaskins told them he had seen the girls that day and believed they'd run away. The family was suspicious, but they had no proof of foul play. In March 1972, another local teen disappeared.
Martha Dix, always known by her friends as Clyde, liked to wear men's clothes. She would hang out at the auto repair shop where Gaskins worked.
Martha Dix was never seen again. By now, local people had become wary of crossing Donald Pee Wee Gaskins.
He was pretty tough in the community. Everybody down in Prospect, they were all scared to death of him. He drove a hearse, and he used to tell people that's what he hauled his bodies to his private cemetery in.
Most normal people don't choose a hearse to drive around for their daily vehicle. He actually had a small sign that says, "I'll haul anything, dead or alive."
He told everybody else that he had a shovel in there just waiting on them, so they better not tell anything they saw him doing.
In June 1974, Gaskins' name was associated with another local disappearance.
In late June 1974, Johnny Sellers and his girlfriend, Jessie Ruth Judy, disappeared. She was only 21 or 22. Their mothers report their disappearance. Johnny and Jessie had been spending a lot of time with Gaskins.
I don't know whether they were involved in the criminal activity or enterprise somehow.
The couple were never found. In the spring of the following year, Gaskins began spending time with a local man called Walter Neely.
Walter Neely and Pee Wee were very good friends. They did some crimes together.
He was about the same size as Pee Wee, really, but Walter was just kind of the buddy that was there to boost Pee Wee up and make him feel big.
In March 1975, Gaskins recruited Neely to help him repaint some stolen cars. The following month, 2 more associates of Gaskins vanished.
Diane Neely was Walter Neely's wife.
Diane disappeared along with Avery Howard, the man she'd been having an affair with. Just as with 19-year-old Martha Dix, no one at the time had reported the couple missing.
People weren't noticed as missing, but the kind of people that Gaskins is mixing with, if you like, they're on the fringes, they're on the edges of society.
There were people who traveled around in the circles that Pee Wee traveled in. I don't think you'll find anybody around here that can tell you anything about them.
When detectives in Florence County began to investigate the disappearance of teen Kim Gelkins in the autumn of 1975, they began to realize just how many associates of Gaskins had mysteriously not been seen for a while.
Once they started peeling back the layers of the onion, I mean, there was just more layers and more layers, just more things that they could attribute to him. They were last seen with Pee Wee.
Agents from the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division, known as SLED, were brought in to help in the investigation, including Ira Parnell, who had a local connection to the case.
My father was the sheriff in Sumter County. It was a very close working relationship with all the sheriffs. Every chance I got to go to Sumter and help do something, I was on the way. And SLED, the state police, were working with the sheriff's department over there.
By the 20th of November 1975, the investigators had plenty of suspicions about Gaskins, but no evidence. What they did have was the warrant in relation to Kim Gelkin's disappearance. A tip-off led them to a house in Sumter where Gaskins was doing business.
They let him get out of the house to prevent a hostage situation. He got in a cab and left the house. And as soon as he got far enough away from the house, they swooped down and arrested him.
While SLED agents orchestrated the sting, the arresting officer was Sheriff Bird Parnell.
He surrendered to my father. He was genuinely afraid. He knew he was caught because he was surrounded. So he just went straight to my daddy.
And he had a ticket for Tupelo, Mississippi in his pocket. I would assume that he was trying to make a getaway.
And when they arrested him, he had a cardboard box with some clothes, a pistol, and a rifle that had the stock removed.
Donald Pee Wee Gaskins was charged with contributing to the delinquency of a minor and remanded in custody. But he wasn't talking. Detectives had at least 8 missing people, but no clues about their whereabouts and no evidence against Gaskins. What would it take to uncover their fates? In November 1975, with 42-year-old Donald Pee Wee Gaskins now in custody, South Carolina law enforcement agents looking into a spate of missing people began to lean on his known associates, including his sidekick, 30-year-old Walter Neely.
They brought him in. It was probably just because he was an associate of Pee Wee's, just to find out what he knew, if he knew anything. And it turned out it was profitable to have him questioned.
Walter Neely explained that he'd been present when Gaskins killed 2 men, and he had been asked by Gaskins to cover up the crime.
Dennis Bellamy and Johnny Knight were helping Pee Wee with a car ring situation.
And they would steal cars and strip the parts and sell the parts.
Working from Woodland in Prospect, close to where he grew up, Gaskins had hit upon a way of lifting the motors out of stolen vehicles.
He would lure the motors out of the engines using large limbs from old oak trees and ropes, and they would pull the motors out of the cars.
On the 10th of October 1975, Gaskins turned on 27-year-old Dennis and his half-brother John Henry, known as Johnny, who was just 15.
The 2 boys were allegedly brought to that spot by the big oak tree. Then you got them to look up in the tree at a limb to see if they thought that that limb would hold a car motor.
As they were looking up at the tree, he pulled his pistol out and shot them at the spot and buried them there.
They knew too much on him, so he thought he needed to kill him.
It was an incredible story, but was it true? The 2 alleged victims were not among the names detectives had been looking for, but they were both the brothers of Diane, Walter Neely's wife, who disappeared 6 months earlier.
Walter Neely finally confessed to where the gravesite was.
So all that led to the search of the Prospect area.
Florence County officials, along with experts from SLED, began the search of Woodland in Prospect on Thursday, the 4th of December. The very same day, the first grisly discovery was made.
First 2 that we found were the 2 boys, John Henry Knight and Dennis Bellamy, and they were each shot in the back of the head one time.
The following day, 4 more bodies were unearthed in what investigators had begun to refer to as Gaskins' private graveyard.
Most of the ones that were found were just skeletal remains and fragments of clothing. Some of them were later killed, I guess. And they had some flesh left, and we found some bullets and bullet fragments. And we were able to work with that a little bit. We were able to at least get some fingerprints. And we would take what dirt was exhumed from around the bodies, sifting what dirt was left to be sure we hadn't lost any bullets or jewelry or any other identifying things that might have been there. So we did that for each grave, each hole.
Within a few days, the 4 bodies had been identified. Jessie Ruth Judy had been murdered along with her boyfriend, Johnny Sellers.
They were both killed in June of 1974. Johnny Sellers was shot with a .30-30 rifle. Jessie Judy's throat was cut.
Jessie's estranged husband, James, was an associate of Gaskins and would later face charges in connection with Johnny Sellers' death. The other couple was Avery Howard and Diane Neely.
Diane Neely was the wife of Walter Neely. They were both killed in April of 1975.
Diane had been shot and stabbed. Avery's cause of death was difficult to ascertain.
I don't recall there being any ballistics evidence, so I'm thinking he was probably stabbed.
Just under a week later, the searchers made a discovery that was even more horrifying.
We found a mother and her 2-year-old child's skeletons. They were just wrapped in plastic, and the child was stuffed in a stump hole.
It's like an old rotted out tree stump that creates a hole in the ground. Very shallow graves.
Investigators poured through police reports for stories of missing mothers and babies, but none matched the victims. It wasn't until January 1976 that the young woman was identified.
That was Doreen Dempsey. She was killed in June of 1973, her and her baby. They were living with Pee Wee at the time with his grandmother in Prospect area.
With poor winter weather setting in, the search was halted. Though 8 bodies had been found, the 3 teenage girls, Janice, Patricia, and Kim, were still missing, with no resolution for their desperate families. With Gaskins still denying involvement in any of the cases, in April 1976, he and Walter Neely were charged with the 8 murders.
Gaskins' first trial in 1976 was for the murder of Dennis Bellamy.
I testified how I had recovered the body, I helped recover the body, dug it up, flew to Charleston for the autopsy, watched Dr. Sexton remove the bullet from his brain, put it in my hand. I cleaned it up, put it in a container.
SLED agent Parnell had compared the bullets with the pistol Gaskins had been carrying the day he was arrested.
Of course, I had the gun at the time to show him. It was a Beretta 32 semi-automatic pistol, and I found sufficient individual identifying characteristics to conclude, based on my examinations, that it was my opinion that these 2 bullets were fired by this gun and no other gun.
Gaskins' adult daughter testified that the gun was his and that he always had it by his side.
He had a nickname for the gun. He never let baby too far out of his hip pocket.
His daughter could also place Bellamy and his half-brother Johnny Knight with Gaskins the night they vanished.
He went to his daughter's house one night, and he had 2 strange boys that she had never met, and they went off into the woods. There were many nights that he came over to his daughter's house with blood on him, and he would claim that he hit a deer, and she would go outside and there would be nothing wrong with his car.
Gaskins' defense was to blame the murder on his friend, Walter Neely.
On the 27th of May 1976, the jury deliberated for less than an hour before finding Donald Henry Pee Wee Gaskins guilty of the murder of Dennis Bellamy. The following month, Walter Neely was also found guilty of the murder.
Both men were sentenced to death, but months later the sentences were commuted to life in prison after the U.S. Supreme Court overturned South Carolina's death statute. In November 1976, reportedly in return for a conjugal visit from his wife, Gaskins made a partial confession.
He told us about first victim was Trish Ann Alsbrook. She was killed in 1970.
Patricia had last been seen with Gaskins' niece, Janice Kirby, who was also missing. On the 4th of November 1976, Patricia's remains were recovered after local law enforcement deciphered a cryptic clue Gaskins had given them.
We were working with the sheriff's department over there to try and locate a place that Pee Wee kept referring to a cement slab. One of Daddy's deputies lived less than a half mile behind an old house spot where there were 3 or 4 concrete slabs over the septic tank in the front yard. And we pried up the concrete slab, shined the light down there, and sure enough, there was a skeleton. She had on a pair of pantyhose, and that had her whole lower skeleton contained.
They brought in a septic tank suction truck to clean out the tank. Then after they sucked the septic tank clean, they found her high school ring with her name in it, and that's what identified her body.
The discovery of the 17-year-old girl's remains brought answers for her grieving family. But the roll call of grisly revelations was far from over. There were many victims left to find, and Pee Wee Gaskins was ready to confess once and for all. By November 1976, 43-year-old Donald Pee Wee Gaskins had been found guilty of 1 murder and had been linked to at least 8 more. That month, South Carolina law enforcement officials finally had an answer to the disappearance that had launched the investigation into Gaskins 14 months earlier.
The body of 13-year-old Kim Gelkins was discovered not far from where she'd been living with Gaskins. The body was badly decomposed, but it was pretty certain that she'd been stabbed. It's also rumoured that she had been abused, not just by Gaskins, but by other men.
The rumour was that Gaskins had murdered Kim to stop her reporting the abuse. Just a few weeks later, Gaskins directed law enforcement to another body, local farmer Silas Barnwell Yates.
Barnwell Yates was killed in February of '75. Pee Wee was hired by Barnwell's ex-girlfriend to kill him.
Pee Wee was contracted by Suzanne Owens, her nickname was Longlegs, to kill Silas Yates for $1,000. And without batting an eye, he did it.
She went with him to the house, knocked on the door. When he came to the door, Pee Wee and another fella pulled him out and handcuffed him, put him in the trunk of the car and drove him to a field, cut his throat, and buried him in a field. Yates' ex-girlfriend went to jail too.
Yates's skeletal remains were still handcuffed when he was found in Williamsburg County, just a quarter of a mile from where Kim Gelkins' body had been found. With 11 bodies now recovered, detectives struggled to understand the pattern to Gaskins' alleged offending.
Pee Wee, you don't ever know. He didn't need a reason to kill you. Some he had reasons, some he didn't. I think it was just a way of life for him at the time. I don't know that he enjoyed it, but it didn't bother him. He didn't have a conscience about it.
I think there probably were different motivations in different circumstances. Just because he was a violent thug who enjoyed frightening people, enjoyed hurting people. And if you annoyed him in any way, that could be the way he's going to respond.
In April 1977, Gaskins was found guilty of Silas Yates's murder. Receiving another life sentence, he returned to Central Correctional. During his testimony, he boasted of another murder, giving hints as to where the body could be found. 2 days later, SLED agents began searching close to where Patricia Olsbrook's remains had been recovered in Sumter County.
Going out the dirt road from where the septic tank was a canal ditch leading off to the right side of the road. We had a bunch of convicts out with bush axes and stuff. They were cleaning it out so we could actually start looking for bones. And I looked down and I thought I saw a rock. And I scraped the leaves off of it, and it was a skull.
The body was identified as Martha Dix, Gaskins' friend, who disappeared in 1972.
He killed her because she said she was having his baby. He put poison in a Coke bottle and gave it to her and killed her and put her in a ditch, and her body laid there until we recovered it.
Gaskins boasted that he killed Martha because he did not wish to have a child with a black woman.
He had no tolerance for interracial marriages or relationships or children.
In 1978, the death penalty was reinstated in South Carolina. Facing trial for the murder of 15-year-old Johnny Knight, in April 1978, Gaskins offered full confessions for his and 7 other murders.
The deal was he'd get consecutive life sentences and spend the rest of his life in jail.
He told us about all the other bodies that he had. Of course, this wasn't overnight. It took him a while to tell us about everybody that he'd killed. It was hard to determine what was truth and what was false. We did everything we could to determine he was telling the truth. We ran him on polygraphs.
Given a so-called truth serum, Gaskins confessed to killing Patricia Olsbrook, Janice Kirby, Martha Dix, and Kim Gelkins.
We gave him sodium pentothal, and he just acted like he was supposed to act that he'd seen on TV and in the movies. Just talked slurred, but he still wouldn't tell you the whole thing.
One thing that could be verified was information the killer gave them on the location of his niece, Janice Kirby's body.
He killed her in Sumter County, but he brought her back to Prospect the next day and buried her in the Prospect area.
In the woods around his childhood home, 15-year-old Janice Kirby's remains were recovered, 8 years after she was last seen by her family.
Gaskin confessed that he'd killed both Janice and Patricia by beating them to death. He maintained that they had actually been taking drugs.
But I think it's far more likely that Gaskin's motivations were sexual.
He offered explanations for some of his other brutal murders too, including the killing of Doreen and Robin Dempsey.
When Pee Wee killed the Dempsey family, he took them to a pond that sits not even 10 yards off the side of a main highway.
He drowned Doreen Dempsey, and he hit the child in the head with a shovel and killed it. And that's the only time I'm aware of that he used the hearse to haul bodies.
And the reason he said he did that was that it was a biracial child. It was a white mother and a black father.
On the 18th of April 1978, Gaskins was handed a further 8 life sentences on top of the 2 he was already serving. Aged just 45, he was facing the prospect of a long incarceration in the notoriously harsh Central Correctional Institution. But Donald Pee Wee Gaskin's story does not end there. In September 1982, a fellow inmate was caught in his crosshairs.
Rudolph Tyner robbed and murdered the owners of a mom-and-pop convenience store, and the son of the parents hired Pee Wee while Pee Wee was in prison to kill Rudolph. He acted like he was befriending Rudolph, and they made plans one night that he was going to call and talk to him.
Gaskins had packed a transistor radio with plastic explosives he suspected of smuggling into prison and taped on a wad of match heads to act as an ignition.
Pee Wee gave Rudolph the transistor radio, and he told Rudolph he'd have to plug it in. Then they could talk out and back pretty clearly.
And so at a certain time, Rudolph was to answer the phone, and as soon as he put that up to his ear, it blew him up. And that was the end.
I know it blew the side of Rudolph's head off.
6 months later, in March 1983, Donald Pee Wee Gaskins was sentenced to death for Tyner's murder.
I just remember feeling quite elated that he was finally going to get his execution like he should have all along.
On Thursday, the 5th of September 1991, Donald Pee Wee Gaskins made one final attempt to thwart the state's attempts to punish him.
The night before he's going to be put to death, he attempts to take his own life and cuts his wrists and he cuts his elbows so that he's going to bleed to death. But that's not surprising at all. He would want control over his own death. He's not going to let anybody else end his life. That would have been beyond the pale for him.
Patched up in the nick of time with 20 stitches, early the following morning, Gaskins faced his final punishment. Sheriff Billy Barnes was there to see justice done.
He walked on his own to the electric chair. He crawled up in it. Electric chair is a pretty big chair, and he's a small fella. And he crawled up in it, sat down, and they strapped him in. They asked him if he had any last words. He said, "Let's go." And they followed through the electrocution.
Even after his execution, Gaskins was keen to tell his side of the story. He'd been barred by the courts from publishing his book, The Final Truth, until after his death. Gaskins claimed in the book to have killed more than 100 people.
He is very detailed in the things that he claims he did. He did claim to have many victims that would never be found.
Gaskins claimed in the late 1960s he was driving the coastal roads of South Carolina, picking up young hitchhikers and killing regularly, one every 6 weeks.
A lot of people who were hitchhiking on the interstates at that time, some of them were runaways and probably wouldn't be missed if anything did happen to them.
Either they were estranged from their family or they'd had no family. And he gravitated toward that type of person, and they gravitated toward him, apparently, because he would offer them a place to stay in his mobile home down near Charleston.
Even though he was a tiny thing, he wasn't a bad-looking young fella. So he had the charm to get him in the car. But then once you were in the car, you weren't coming out and back alive. So he could really turn it on and off.
For the men who brought Donald Pee Wee Gaskins to justice, the claims don't ring true.
It's conceivable that there might have been a few, but I don't think it was anywhere near what he said. And I think he did that only to make himself look big and police look small.
I don't think there's a word of truth in it. I think he was trying to build himself up to be the biggest, baddest criminal ever been in South Carolina or in the United States. Because he claimed 60-something people he'd killed in that book. I don't think he killed anything more than what we found.
A man who killed for expedience, deviance, prejudice, or any other reason that took his fancy. Donald Pee Wee Gaskins confessed to at least 13 murders and was put to death for murder number 14. From innocent babies to wealthy middle-aged men, Gaskins had no limits on who he would kill. Brought to justice in 1976, Gaskins has gone down in history as one of the world's most evil killers.
Alan Morgan found his wife's body in the back storeroom of their shop when he and their 2 children returned from the cinema on Thursday night.
This is the position that she was left in.
Yeah, I mean, it's horrific, isn't it?
Carol's life was taken away from her at the age of 36. She deserves for the police to find who killed her.
Carol should still be alive today and enjoying her children and her grandchildren, and somebody's robbed that of her.
In over 40 years of investigative work, nobody had been charged with Carol's murder.
The attack that was sustained on Carol was so ferocious and so brutal.
We're investigating the murder that happened at the shop back in 1981.
Everyone that loved her deserves to know what happened to Carol.
The tragic element of this case is simply that it's not been solved. My case, if we ever get it there, is going to be circumstantial.
Yeah, it is. So, that's my overview. It's a bloody tough case.
This is one last attempt to try and get justice for Carol.
The scene of our offence is 61 Finch Crescent in Linslade. Carol was alone in the store at the time of the attack as her husband Alan and her 2 children, Dean and Jane, were out at the cinema. So in 1981, the original SIO focused very much on a burglary or a robbery that had gone wrong.
A man was seen about 500 yards from the shop in a motor car. He was seen to be clutching to his chest 2 plastic bags. It would appear at this stage that the bags contained the stolen money and the cigarettes from the shop.
That weapon that was used must have been a really sharp-bladed article to have caused such brutal injuries. Carol's still got her wedding ring on, and this was supposed to be a robbery, and if it was a robbery, why did they not take this stuff that would have been valuable?
Despite having an alibi checked and accepted by the police, Mr. Morgan can't convince some of his neighbours that he's innocent.
What are they saying about you, It's been found that I killed my wife. And as the police know themselves, and you yourselves know, well, I was in Luton, taking the kids to the pictures.
Alan's alibi has been checked. His alibi is concrete. I have to accept that that's where he was. Our motive is essentially the classic love story. There's an ongoing affair between Alan and Margaret, and that the motive is embedded in that affair.
There was a fairly prolonged relationship, I think, between Alan and Margaret. There's anecdotal evidence that they were even found in bed the very next morning.
So this is Alan and Margaret after the murder. Then moved up north, and then they've gone on to get married.
My decision is to bring both Alan and Margaret in under arrest.
Hello, Alan. I'm from the police. I've come to arrest you this morning on suspicion of the murder of Carol Morgan.
I'm arresting you on suspicion of conspiracy to murder.
What?
And the murder of Carol Patricia Morgan.
I had no idea that anything like this was going to occur.
Do you have any information about who was responsible?
Oh, none at all.
Police are appealing for anyone with information, no matter how small, to get in touch and speak to the dedicated incident room.
Alan and Margaret have been released from police custody under investigation. It can be frustrating when you have to release suspects whilst the investigation continues, but particularly in the most serious of cases, we don't give up.
There's been comprehensive media strategy which involved witness appeals, and as a consequence of that, a new witness has come forward with new evidence,
potentially undermining Alan Morgan's alibi. We're scheduled for a 2-hour briefing today because there is lots and lots to go through. I'm going to hand over to Lindsay if you want to take us through all of the significant developments since we last met, please.
In terms of witnesses, we had a guy call into the incident room a couple of weeks ago, Michael Merrin, who lived in Leighton Buzzard at the time of the murder. Essentially, he has said that his brother sent him a message after Christmas with a picture of the poster from Linslade about the murder and said, "What do you think about this?" He's had a think about it and has made contact with us. And I've spoken to him, and he is saying that he was a regular at the shop. He knew Alan and Carol to talk to. He spoke to Alan on a regular basis about football and cars. He knew Alan's car by sight, and he knew Alan well enough to obviously have conversations regularly.
On the evening of the 13th of August 1981, took the turn around the roundabout towards Leighton Buzzard, and I see Alan Morgan on the other side of the road. 1, 2, 3 seconds, and he drove past in that direction, heading towards Finch Crescent. And I obviously carried on home. A couple of days later, when the local paper came out, it stated that she died on the Thursday evening and that the police weren't interested in Alan Morgan because he was at the cinema. And I turned to my mum and I said, well, that can't be right. I saw him on Thursday evening when we were driving back from the railway station at around 6:45. And my mum said to me, well, do you think you should go and tell the police that? And I said, I don't know, what do you think? And she said, well, if you're sure that you saw him. I said, Mum, I definitely saw him. So I made arrangements to go to Leighton Buzzard Police Station, and I told them what I'd seen, and they said, thank you very much for coming in, but at this moment in time, we've ruled Mr. Morgan out of our inquiry because he was at the cinema in Luton at that point in time. And that was, for me, the end of it. I know what my 18-year-old self saw, and I 100% am convinced, have always been convinced, that what I saw that night was Alan Morgan in his car.
Clearly, what we need to investigate and explore is whether we can prove or corroborate that information, because if Alan has come back to Linslade, then clearly that presents him the opportunity to murder Carol. So we made arrests in November of last year. Wherever they could rely upon, I can't remember that, that's what they did.
I see.
So the National Crime Agency have a number of specialists who I can ask for objective and independent advice that I can consider as part of my decision-making process. What I would say is that Alan was always considered to have an established alibi. He had taken the children to the cinema to a double bill, which we think would have run for about 4 hours.
Mm-hmm. They were at the cinema 4 hours and Dad would have sat next to him all the time?
No. There is doubt around,
Okay.
or there is the possibility that he could have done anything within that time, and his alibi is not nailed on.
Oh, great.
And then that is called into question because as recently as this year, a witness has come forward as a result of all of our media activity. There's a chap by the name of Michael Merrin.
Yeah.
He specifically says he sees Alan Morgan travelling back into Linslade in his car on the night of the murder. Now, I've got the team searching the 7,000 documents that we've got, but we just can't find any reference to Merrin or anything that Merrin may have provided to the original investigation team. This for me is a domestic homicide. Layering lots and lots and lots of coincidences and lies, and but in terms of direct physical evidence, I'm not sure I'll ever. I'm not sure the golden nugget exists. Now there is forensic work still ongoing, but I think this will always be a circumstantial case.
Going to your hypothesis then, Morgan and Spooner conspired together to do it.
Yeah.
So I get all that. What I'm not as clear on is, do you have a hypothesis or are you still working through that? Who's actually...
As to who was the...
Yeah.
I haven't.
Okay.
I can't sit here. To this day, I'm not sure. I think either of them could have done.
Yeah.
I think they could have paid someone to do it. I really don't know. My case, if we ever get it there, it is going to be circumstantial.
Yeah, it is. So, it's a bloody tough case, isn't it? Let's be honest on where it is. I concur with what your hypotheses are. The issue for me is how we get there, of course. And that's always the challenge, isn't it, you know?
I am Sian Saunders, Senior Crown Prosecutor in the Complex Casework Unit of the Crown Prosecution Service. My job is to decide whether or not there's a realistic prospect of conviction in a case and whether it's in the public interest to prosecute that case. This is an incredibly interesting case, but it's also going to be a very, very difficult case because witnesses may be dead and witnesses may not remember. So we are relying on an investigation that happened over 40 years ago. So it's going to be a very difficult case to prosecute.
We're just heading out to Linslade Cemetery to try and locate the gravestone of Carol Morgan. So in a cold case like this, I think it gives us some good background in relation to the family. So for us, it's quite important to try and find that out, who's put the gravestone down and what it says.
We're here, aren't we? Somewhere here.
No idea where this is going to be. I'm assuming we're looking for something a lot older.
Yeah, some of these look new and cared for.
This one?
The open book.
Here we go. Cherished memories of our beloved daughter Carol, forever in our thoughts.
And then the other side of the book
is blank.
Is blank. No mention of her being a mum or a wife.
Or a surname.
No. It's awful. Poor Carol. I think the fact that Morgan isn't on there suggests that maybe the parents wanted to disassociate her from the name, from him. I mean, could it suggest that they didn't have a very good relationship with him, or that they thought that he was involved in some way in her death?
Auntie Carol was someone who was a quiet, relaxed person, but bubbly. She was friendly. She always smiling. I just remember her always smiling. I remember a time when we didn't see Auntie Carol. This was after she married Alan Morgan. It was a couple of years after they married, they moved away to Leighton Buzzard, and we never heard from them again. We lost contact with them, and I think a lot of that was to do with the fact that he was so manipulative. I felt that he's had something to do with it. When I was younger, he just was a person that I didn't know him much, but whenever I saw him, he wasn't a person that was very friendly. He was nothing like Carol. She was open and kind, and he wasn't.
The investigation has stalled somewhat during the pandemic. So we recently reviewed all of the original witnesses who provided statements to the investigation back in 1981. There were a number of those witnesses that we hadn't been able to trace, hadn't been able to catch up with. And in the last week or so, we've been able to trace one of those witnesses who's provided significant information to the investigation. This was somebody that lived locally, somebody who was a child, i.e. under 18 years old at the time of the offence, and who not only knew our suspects, but also knew Carol, our victim. And I think at this stage, that's as much as I'm prepared to say. Obviously, when a witness contacts us, we have to have some conversation with them to ascertain what it is that they've got to say, what is their account. In this particular instance, the evidence that this individual started to talk about was so significant and so key and critical to our case that the officer deliberately stopped that conversation and said, I can't talk to you about this in any depth. We asked them to stop talking and we asked them to wait until we're in a position to go and sit down with them and capture the entire account for the first time as much as possible on camera. And as we speak at this moment in time, those officers are with that witness and securing her account. Yes, massive, absolutely massive. Massive development for the investigation. We are very much, as a team, of the opinion that this is the piece of evidence that we have been looking for. This is the direct evidence that has evaded us so far.
Right then, and we're all good to go. Okay, and what do you think happened? What do I think happened to Carol? I think she had a fight. And lost the fight. Who would have wanted to fight her? Whoever it was really angry at her, hated her. And what makes you say that? Because of the way she was killed. It's a pretty savage way, isn't it? And do you know anyone that might have wanted her dead? Yeah. Who? Her husband. And I suppose Margaret.
When I was 14, I got expelled from school, and Margaret was assigned as my tutor from the age of 14 to 16. I was in a pretty bad place. I was really, really struggling. And Margaret really helped with that. So I could talk about, you know, the sort of stuff you wouldn't talk to your mum or your dad about, you know. And yeah, she saved my life in some ways. I came to really admire Margaret and to respect her a lot, and I grew fond of her. It was at least 3 months before the murder. It could have been longer. I went to a pub called Dolphin, which no longer exists in Lane Buzzard. I met both of them there, and it wasn't just a casual thing. It was arranged by Margaret, and I couldn't really understand why. It led to a conversation about, well, I'd quite like Carol dead, from Alan. And then them talking about various ways. and ruling them out, like the insulin. Then there was car accident. And there was like, neither one of them knew enough about car mechanics to be able to do that. And what about the children? They could be in the car, etc. Looking at it through my adult eyes now, you know, why did it take you 42 years to speak up? But it's not as straightforward as that. It's like I was a 17-year-old mixed-up kid who didn't really know which way was up and had more than enough of her own problems. I found out that Carol had died. Margaret phoned me and told me. I was absolutely freaked out. And she was very keen to say, don't talk to anyone. She kept saying he didn't do it. And I kept saying, yeah, but I don't believe he didn't do it. You might believe that, but I don't believe that. I think he's capable of it. And he hated her. You know he hated her. And now I'm confused. Now I'm really frightened now. Because the one person I never considered that could have done it is her. In a million years. I never asked myself that. I never asked her that. I never questioned it. I totally 100% trusted that she was a good person. She would dream of doing that. She saved my life, you know. She'd been so good to me. She would never hurt anyone. And I don't know anymore whether I'm right. And it's killing me. I always hoped that I would have a chance, you know, that somebody would ask me, that the police would come to me. And I was pleased and relieved when my mum said, the police were here, came to see me and they want to speak to you. And I was like, hallelujah. Hallelujah.
To cut a really long story short, essentially she went to the Dolphin pub. She was driven there by Margaret and Alan was already there. They discussed that he hated Carol, he didn't want her in his life, and how could they get rid of her? There was a discussion around, if we did get rid of her, maybe we could do it with insulin. Then they discussed, well, maybe we could set up a car crash. And then they sort of said, well, actually, maybe we could get someone else to help. Looking back now as an adult, she now thinks they were trying to involve her in a conspiracy. And she was so frightened that she left the pub. Margaret then came after her and said, oh, what are you worried about? It's only a joke. It's only a joke. He's not going to do anything. And Jane categorically says that she believes that Alan would be capable of doing that, and she did think it would happen.
This is a huge step forward. This is the first time we've heard this direct evidence, so that absolutely supports the need to bring them in under arrest. And along with everything else, put this evidence to them. There's confirmation of a conspiracy and there's direct evidence of overhearing that conspiracy being discussed. Still a long way to go, still a lot of work to do, but a kind of work to be done with a renewed vigour and you know, with some more optimism now around what that might result in. Yeah, it's good. It's good development. We are in a different position this time round. You know, I accept that first arrest, you could almost say was almost like a bit of a fact find, really. And I think, if I'm being honest, we were in a position where they had the upper hand, as did their legal representation. And we're down in Brighton, and I think everything was kind of stacked against us. I see it very differently this time round. No, we're not popping down the road to Brighton. You're coming back to Bedfordshire, which is where the murder was committed. You know, this is a murder. This is a murder investigation, not some sweets that have been nicked off a shelf in your local co-op store. So you're going to come back to Bedfordshire and we're going to deal with you in Bedfordshire. You know, straight away, we are dictating this is what's happening. We are in control of this. This is our investigation and we are running it.
And it feels different this time, I think, you.
Well, now we've got something to put to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of those being Jane. So, yeah, we've got things to talk about.
Detectives investigating the death of a woman near Leighton Buzzard nearly 40 years ago have arrested 2 people on suspicion of murder.
What can you tell me about Jane Bunting?
No comment.
Can you tell me a bit more about the relationship between you and Jane?
No comment.
So, Jane says that you were being quite open about the fact you wanted to get out of your marriage.
Oh, okay, no comment.
Did you? Did you want to get out of your marriage?
No comment.
You never know what to expect when you go into an interview. We prepare for all eventualities. We prepare for people to say nothing, exercise their right to go no comment. But if someone is innocent, particularly of a murder, and they have played no part in the murder, one would expect them to be honest, transparent, detailed, and try and help you, particularly if it's your wife or someone that you love, you know, and care about.
So she said some of the suggestions that you'd come out with were that you could use your insulin to kill her. Have you ever thought about doing that?
No.
That you could stage a car accident. Have you ever thought about doing that?
No.
You both then began to discuss various ways about killing Carol, about what if Carol had a car accident. Is this jogging any memories?
No.
Margaret?
No.
One of the things that you said is, I'd quite
I'm
like...
alleged to have said, not said.
Well, this is what I'm trying to get to the bottom of.
Yeah, but you're
Did you
saying
say
I said
that?
it.
Okay.
But I'm alleged to have said it, but don't comment. I did not.
You did not? Okay, just tell me that then, if you didn't. I'd quite like my wife gone.
No,
You didn't say that, or you did say that?
I didn't say that. Oh, I don't know.
You don't know if you said it?
Don't comment.
Do you remember that you asked Jane not to talk to the police about this conversation in the pub?
No.
Did you ask her not to
No.
mention to the police?
I don't recall the conversation at all.
One of the things that Jane said to you in regards to about killing someone, that she could never do that. And then you replied and she said it was as cold as ice, I could.
Now, I'm sure now you can see, Margaret, why you're in custody today, because
Absolutely.
of what she's saying.
I do not recall any of those conversations, and I have said that all the way along.
Yeah. Because if her account is right, there is a conspiracy going on there. That's if her account is right, okay? Me frowning at me, but if her account is right, there's the conspiracy. It's a very serious.
I understand that.
Yeah?
I do understand
So you
that.
can see why now you're in custody today. Now I'm glad you understand that.
Yes, I do. But
All right.
as I say, and I keep repeating it, I do not recall
I know you keep
any of
saying
these conversations.
you keep saying you do not record any of these conversations, Margaret, but you're not saying they didn't happen.
Good. No. She can't keep to a no comment at all. She's advised again, but still couldn't help itself.
That is a bizarre response, isn't it? I don't recall
Yeah,
that.
that's really bizarre.
You'd be like...
Because she goes no comment.
Yeah.
And so then I say, well, okay, let's clarify. You say no comment because you don't remember, or are you saying no comment because you just don't want to say? That's because I don't remember.
It is a bizarre, because you know, what you'd expect is, no, that conversation didn't happen. That conversation has never happened.
No.
Don't know what she's talking
Weird.
about, but
Yeah.
to say, I don't remember it, it's not very credible, is it? We, so far in this investigation, are no nearer being able to prove who murdered Carol. However, we are remarkably close now to being able to prove that there was a conspiracy to have Carol murdered.
You then asked Jane if her boyfriend would know anyone who would kill Carol.
Did he? I don't know. I don't. No.
Did they approach somebody who was known to them, or indirectly or directly? Were they able to recruit for want of a better phrase, a hit person to carry out the murder? It's not something we can answer with any degree of certainty at the moment. There's only Alan or Margaret that can tell me if somebody was paid by them to murder Carol.
Jane said that she felt like she was being drawn into a conspiracy, something that she didn't want to be part of, something that you wanted her to be part of. Is that right?
No comment.
Did you want Jane to be part of plans to murder your wife?
No comment.
Was that your goal that evening?
No comment.
I've put a phone call into the Crown Prosecution Service just to consider the charging decision. I know that the interview teams are kind of there and chomping at the bit, and they'd really like to see us go for a charge, but at the moment my thoughts are that they're likely to be released under investigation.
We now have a significant amount of evidence that suggests that Alan and Margaret Morgan were involved in this offence. But I can't charge the case until I'm absolutely sure that there's nothing in the material from the 1981 case that might undermine our case against Alan and Margaret. And so I've advised the police to complete a review of all the paperwork from the 1981 case. The decision to charge has to be right, and it has to be right first time in a case like this. And it's my decision, and one that I have to be prepared to stand by. And until the case is ready, I'm not prepared to make a charging decision.
A man and a woman in their 70s arrested in connection with the death of a woman near Leighton Buzzard nearly 40 years ago have been released under investigation. The body of 36-year-old...
Police say while no one has ever been charged, they remain committed to finding out the truth for Carol's family.
It's a huge undertaking to review all of the investigation material, but it's so important that it's done properly, and it's so important that it's given the right time. It can make or break your case. Today's effectively D-Day, if you like. Today is the day where I find out whether 4.5 years of investigative work is going to result in a prosecution. So this is us having a conference with CPS and council now that they're in receipt of our full evidential case, and asking, OK, are we going to prosecute this? Are you going to give me a charging decision? Are we going to court?
So we are moving closer to being able to reach an ultimate decision on the critical question of whether there is a case to go to a jury or there isn't.
This is a complex case which relies on the person presenting it to a court understanding the fine detail and being able to explain to a jury how those small pieces of evidence fit together into the bigger picture. Whilst the decision as to whether or not to prosecute is always going to be one for me, it's incredibly helpful to have an opinion from Pavlos, because he is known to have worked on large and complex cases in the past.
Okay, so this has been the most thorough re-examination of this case. And if there's a case, there'll be a case of conspiracy to murder against Alan Morgan, Margaret Morgan. And if there's a case to charge against them both, I think everyone will agree that there is more evidence in relation to Alan than there is in relation to Margaret, albeit that she's inextricably linked given her close relationship with Alan Morgan. So So the case that I've advised in favour of charging, which the Crown Prosecution Service will review, is that Alan Morgan and Margaret Morgan conspired together and with the person who killed Carol Morgan to murder her, and that was done by offering payment, which was made to somebody who then committed murder.
Of course I want to catch the person that murdered Carol. Of course we do. But there's no direct evidence about who that somebody was. There really are only two people that know the answer to that question, and they're the two people that we're investigating for the conspiracy to murder Carol.
In order to prove a conspiracy, we only have to prove that there was an agreement to kill. So in this case, we would be alleging that Alan and Margaret found somebody and paid them to kill Carol.
So busy. But come on in and meet the team. Alongside the normal lines of inquiry and investigation that my team have been conducting, one area of investigation that we used was that on each occasion that Alan and Margaret were arrested, we would record any conversation that they have with each other.
What are you going to say?
Because I need to wait.
I say, what are you going to say? We don't know, we don't know anything. Those are pictures.
So the evidence contained no admissions of guilt, no conversation that lends itself to what actually happened on the night or who was actually responsible, but their behaviour, their comments to each other, the general demeanour and discussion they have is absolutely of assistance to our case.
I don't understand anything. Well, about else. People.
Alan says to Margaret, I don't want to say anything because they might have.
And then they go quiet.
And then they go quiet. You heard that?
Yeah.
What was it that he might say that he wouldn't want the police to hear? These are potentially significant, suspicious comments, and I'd be interested to hear, if they're brought in for further interviews, what explanation they give.
In light of the recorded evidence and along with the review of all of the investigation material, it enables me to have Alan and Margaret rearrested for the conspiracy to murder Carol.
Morning.
Morning, Margaret.
Yeah. Oh, Winnie, you're right.
Is Alan here as well?
Oh, yeah. Hello.
Can we come in, please?
Yeah.
Thank you. Is he up?
No.
Oh, okay.
Winnie, come get.
Just going to come up. It's the police.
Alan? Right, I need you to listen to me, okay? Following your previous arrests and release, okay, a number of inquiries have been conducted over a period of time. As a result of those inquiries, I'm now arresting you on suspicion of conspiracy to murder Carol Patricia Morgan on or before the Thursday, the 13th of August, 1981.
So I'm arresting you on suspicion of conspiracy to murder, okay? And that is the murder of Carol Patricia Morgan on or before the Thursday, the 13th of August, 1981. Right. Okay?
So the plan today is that yourself and your wife are going to come with us. We're going to go to Bedfordshire Police Headquarters, where you're going to be interviewed throughout the day. Okay? And then decisions will be made thereafter. So I need you to get yourself dressed and ready to go, please.
I'm sorry, Colin. I'm sorry.
That's everything.
Do it, love.
Just don't tell me.
To be honest, love, I don't know what they've done.
You must have seen it.
You're right. Yeah. Our suspects were arrested this morning. They've been transported back up to Bedfordshire, so we're awaiting their arrival. I just need to check in with the team and see what's happened, what I need to be aware of, and make sure that everything's running as it should be. This will be the final stage of our investigation. And the fact that our lawyer, Charles Saunders, from the Crown Prosecution Service is present here with us is very encouraging.
On the basis of the material I have already and the review of all the material that's been undertaken, I'm almost in a position where I can make a charging decision. The police have now gathered this evidence from the recordings, and it's really important that I understand Alan and Margaret's view and explanation of that recording before I make a charging decision.
So this is a conversation between you and Alan on the 27th of November, so when you were first arrested. So it's difficult to hear, but you shush there and you whisper something outside as well.
It's a wee, probably. That sounded like.
From the point of view it looks from me, this looks very suspicious. Is there anything, you'd laugh about it, but...
I know I'm laughing
Is
about
there, is
it,
there
but
anything...
no comment.
Well, tell me why I'm getting that wrong.
No comment.
You lower your voice for that part when you're shushing him, and you whisper something to him deliberately so we can't hear, and then you raise your voice back up again, either side saying, I need a wee.
Don't know.
So we can't hear what you're saying.
As I have said before, on every occasion, I am absolutely nothing to do with it.
So why would an innocent person do that? Why would you shush someone that's trying to get their story straight for the police? Why not protest your innocence? She started with I need a wee, and then finished with I'm going to say I need a wee.
No comment.
To cover the shushing and then whispering in the middle.
No comment.
Why is it you find this funny, Alan?
I'm going to say something now. No, you don't have to. I am. Have you ever been in this situation that I'm in now?
Thankfully not.
Right.
I'm not sure I'd laugh.
No, if you wouldn't like it.
Right.
It doesn't matter what I say.
We agree on that.
All right?
Yeah.
Whatever I say...
Yeah.
Or whatever you say...
The problem is you're not saying anything else.
No. I'm trying.
Well, you just go no comment.
No, shit. I know I'm not saying no comment because I'm frightened of what you're going to do even if...
What we're doing is trying to get your...
No, you're not. You're trying to incriminate me in doing whatever.
How?
I don't know.
Nor do we, because we're not trying to...
Can we just have a break?
Okay.
The only people that have benefited from Carol's death are you and Alan, Margaret. Nobody else.
How many times do I have to keep saying it? I have had nothing to do with this.
The only person that can benefit from this is you and Margaret, and which is exactly what happened. She moved in a short while later. You played happy families and moved away a couple of months later. The shop was sold up and bought and paid for, and then you went on to buy another shop, and everything was fine after that. Is there anything you want to tell us?
No comment.
She was probably advised to go no comment, but in true Margaret style, she couldn't do that. She reiterated several times that she wasn't involved, that he wasn't involved.
She's not denying that what we're telling her is happening. Like
Just can't explain it.
She just said, I don't remember the conversation, I don't know why I would do that. I said, do you agree that what we've read out is what's been played to you? And she's like, yeah, that's definitely me shushing. That's definitely him doing what you're saying. But I just don't remember the conversation. I don't know why I would do that. But we're totally innocent. That's all the way through. We're totally innocent. However, if I was a third person, I'd think the same as you.
Okay. No, if you're innocent, you know you're
Yeah,
innocent.
that's
You
what I said.
protest your innocence,
Is that all
and you have nothing to hide. You're not worried about anybody recording you.
So it's mainly no comment, and he did stay no comment this time because every time he went to talk and he did want to talk, the solicitor just tapped him on the side.
Yeah, I mean, we've probably suggested, like, the shushing, I don't want to say anything because you're clearly aware that it's been recorded. You've clearly got something to hide and you're not telling us. You're clearly involved in some way with Carol's murder, but you're just not prepared to tell us about it. No comment. So I was like, well, that speaks for itself.
I think that brings us to you, Sean, and whether...
You're all sitting there hoping,
Well,
aren't you?
what do you... Is there anything else you need from us?
No.
What do you need?
I don't need anything else.
Okay.
So I think I've got it all, and I don't think that anything that they've said today changes anything that we've previously discussed or thought about over the last 5 years. I think we're happy that there's nothing in there that's going to catch us out, which is the most important thing. Nothing at trial that's suddenly going to come out that we don't know about. With that in mind, I think there is enough evidence to charge both of them with conspiracy to murder.
Excellent.
And I just need to finish off the advice. It's pretty much done, and I will be able to hit the button.
To finally get to that point where an independent decision maker is saying, yeah, we're going to charge, the evidence is sufficient to charge, it's a huge, huge relief, but it's also a great deal of satisfaction.
Hello again. Okay, so CPS have come back with a charging decision to charge you with one offence. This officer here is going to read out the charge.
On the 13th of August 1981 at Leighton Buzzard in the county of Bedfordshire, you conspired together with Margaret Morgan to murder Carol Morgan.
So, in relation to that charge, Alan, do you want to make a reply?
Not guilty.
Okay.
Carol was a really, really ordinary woman, and I don't say that unkindly. She was just an ordinary woman doing a really ordinary job in a really quiet housing estate. And she died in a most extraordinary way. And actually, if you take out of the picture the robbery hypothesis and look at it, who else had a motive to kill her? Who else would have wanted her dead? And why was she killed with such ferocity? So it comes down ultimately to motive, and then really the only people who needed or wanted her dead were Alan and Margaret. It gave them what they needed. It gave them what they wanted. They wanted to be together, and there wasn't any other way. It's horribly simple, but devastating and very sad for Carol and Carol's family.
You are charged with the following offence. You do not have to say anything, but it may harm your defence if you do not mention now something which you later rely on in court. Anything you do so may be given in evidence. On the 13th of August 1981 at Leighton Buzzard in the county of Bedfordshire, conspired together with Alan Morgan to murder Carol Morgan.
In relation to that charge, do you want to make a reply?
Wish to plead not guilty.
Not guilty, okay?
Yeah, I did Alan, and then she did, Kelly did Margaret.
Not guilty.
Yeah, they both said exactly the same. Both said not guilty straight away. Yeah.
Just because we've charged them, they ain't going to suddenly roll over and say, oh, yeah, all right, you're right, are they? So
that's done.
Good. From the outset, I always thought we had a good chance of detecting this and seeing Alan and Margaret charged with this offence. I'm just pleased for the team because they've worked so hard on this. I get a great deal of satisfaction out of knowing they will feel elated as to what we've achieved today. So now that we have charged Alan and Margaret, it's time to prepare for a Crown Court trial. So today is our first day of the trial at Luton Crown Court. Do I believe that Alan and Margaret are involved in Carol's murder? Absolutely. Absolutely, 100%. I think they're involved, have orchestrated it. But it doesn't matter what I think, does it? It's the jury that determine that.
A trial many feared would never see the light of day finally got underway, almost 43 years after Carol Morgan was hacked to death and found on a shop floor in the town of Linslade.
42 years after his second wife, Carol, was found repeatedly struck with an axe or a machete, Alan Morgan and Margaret Morgan, who was his lover at the time and is now his third wife, arrived at Luton Crown Court to face charges of conspiracy to murder, charges they both deny.
Telling a story through the structure of a trial is always hard, but here we've got decades that have passed. And so what I really want the jury to be able to understand is the nature of that illicit affair that Alan and Margaret were having with each other, and also understanding the evidence that either or both of them conspired with another killer to commit the murder of Carol Morgan.
Jurors in the trial of a couple accused of conspiracy to murder have retired to consider their verdict. The couple, who are in their 70s, have been on trial at Luton Crown Court for the past 8 weeks.
The jury are in their room, deliberating. We have no idea. The whole process is sacrosanct, locked down. Only they know what they're talking about. It could still go one or two ways. The worst possible outcome, I think, for everyone would be a hung jury, because I'm fairly confident we would go again if that panned out. And that brings a whole rehash of all the stresses and trials and tribulations we and the witnesses have been through.
All the evidence suggests that we've got the right people. So unfortunately, I think if it becomes back as not guilty, that'll be the end of it. There won't be any, it will remain open, but there's no evidence to suggest any other routes or lines of inquiry.
It's a nerve-wracking time for everyone involved, but obviously this is the summation of years of work for us. So it's a bit, you just don't know what's going to happen, so it's just a waiting game, really.
Well, everything is at stake. Everything's at stake. This has been a 6-year journey for me. It's been a 43-year journey for justice for Carol Morgan and Carol Morgan's family. So everything's at stake. It's the first time anybody's been charged, stood trial in relation to Carol's murder. So the outcome of this is really significant. After a 6-year investigation and a 43-year journey for justice for Carol Morgan, we finally got our verdict. Alan Morgan has been convicted unanimously of conspiracy to murder Carol Morgan. The jury were out deliberating for almost exactly 1 week, and they've acquitted Margaret Morgan of conspiracy to murder. She's free, she's at liberty to go and get on with her life as she sees fit, but clearly that life will now be without Alan Morgan.
The verdict against Margaret is one that the jury came to. I can't go behind that. They heard all the evidence, they made their decision. I have no way of knowing what it was that made them come to that conclusion. But the evidence against Alan was always going to be stronger.
Alan Morgan, you fall to be sentenced for conspiracy to murder your wife, Carol Morgan, who was savagely killed on the 13th of August 1981. Only one person knows the identity of the murderer, and that is you, Mr. Morgan. That is the secret which you have harboured for the last 40 years. The law has now caught up with you, and you must pay due punishment for your part in this crime. There's only one truly wicked person who's been in this court, and that is you, Alan Morgan. For conspiracy to murder, I sentence you to imprisonment for life. Taking into account the aggravating and mitigating factors to which I have referred, the minimum term to be served shall be 22 years. You may be taken down.
Margaret, is there anything you'd like to say? Your reaction to the sentence?
I'm really pleased with the sentencing. We couldn't have asked for more. I was somewhat surprised. I was concerned that the minimum term was going to be a lot less than 22 years. I think it sends out a fantastic message.
The sentence was a just one, in accordance with the law as it was at the time. Whilst it's going to be difficult for Alan to spend 22 years or the rest of his life in prison, it's only fair that he has to be punished for what he did to Carol.
And Carol's life was taken away so suddenly, so shockingly. She didn't deserve any of this, and she should be living her life to the full.
Carol has missed out on seeing her children grow into adulthood, seeing them have successful lives, seeing them become parents and becoming a grandparent. She has been robbed of all of that. I'm obviously pleased with the conviction of Alan. However, our efforts to bring anybody else who has played a part in this conspiracy to justice will continue, because I think we owe Carol that.